Hello and welcome to another part in me, Steel Fur's new player hero guide series. This time talking about Azalea, Ace in the Hole. Azalea is a difficult hero to talk about. Some people really love her aesthetic. She's essentially a ranger, which we've spoken about before. And just to remind you, of course, if you are watching this as a standalone and you're just watching through these videos, but you haven't really seen the overview yet, please do go and watch that because that has a broad overview of every hero in the game and not just Azalea. Of course, if you are really sure that Azalea is for you or you're definitely considering her, then this is the video to help you hopefully make up your mind about whether or not that's the right choice for you. Hopefully this is going to help you. Obviously, let me know in the description of the video if you have any comments, questions this video didn't answer, and I will try and get back to you and point you in the direction of resources. So Azalea is a ranger, and the core cast mechanic of ranger focuses around arrows. Arrows cannot be played from your hand, they can only be fired from the arsenal, and ranger has essentially got a bow that loads arrows into the arsenal. So you'll see the death dealer, you pay 1 resource. If you have no cards in your arsenal, you can put an arrow card from your hand face up into your arsenal. If you do, draw a card, and that basically lets you cycle a card out of your hand into the arsenal, and then you have go again to basically fire that arrow. Azalea's other ability is quite interesting. It costs 0. You put a card from your arsenal at the bottom of your deck. If you do, you put the top card of your deck face down into your arsenal. If it's an arrow card, gain dominate until the end of a turn, get go again. So this is a good way of basically letting you arsenal any card and then hoping the top of your deck is an arrow. But it's even better if you don't do it blind. So for example, you can use the Skullbone Cross Wraps, which is her legendary, to opt for 1 and get go again. So the combo, the sequence we're talking about there is, it's the end of your turn, you chuck anything into your arsenal, you turn it up with Skullbone Cross Wrap, you opt for 1. If the top card of your deck is an arrow, you then use Azalea, and then you can basically put that arrow in and get dominate, right? And then do whatever else you want to it. So, and then if that arrow had go again, you could then use Death Dealer, or if you don't have an arrow on the top of your deck, you can load an arrow with Death Dealer, and then you can shoot that arrow. Now, everything I've just said is the way you attack, and that's one of the problems that Azalea has suffered from, and I don't want to do this video without being honest about the problems. I think she's in a better place than she's been before, because she just recently got some new cards, and I suspect with the new Everfest Carnival set coming out, she's going to get better again, but I will be honest that she hasn't been in a really good place, and the reason for that is that this is what you have to do to attack. You have to load an arrow, have one in your hand, or you have to do something weird off the top of your deck just to get an arrow in the arsenal, right? And if you're not doing either of those things, then basically you don't have good you don't have good attacks. And even if you do all of those things, you're still only firing, say, 1 attack for 5, or you're buffing it for 3 and coming with 1 attack for 8. Meanwhile, Guardian is just pitching 2 blues and coming in for 6, right? So, Azalea struggles in that regard with the arrows in a way that, say, the new Ranger like Lexi doesn't. So for the moment, my recommendation still, if you really like the idea of playing Ranger, is to go and try Lexi from Tales of Aria out. But let's not go down that route too much, because this, of course, is the Azalea article, and I want really to give you guys something who are interested in Azalea something to do. So there's 2 real ways to build Azalea. I don't know if I really have those deck lists here. Again, I do. This is one of those deck lists. You can either go wide or you can go tall. Now, going wide, obviously, in the context of the game, is where you play a lot of attacks with go again, because it's more difficult for your opponent to block, say, 4 attacks that come in for 4 than it is to block 1 attack that comes in for 12, because they can chuck 3 cards against, basically it's just about how they block with their hand, right? It's a lot easier to use a big defense reaction like an unmovable and block a lot more damage versus your pitch, i.e. I pitch a 3 to block 8 than it is to block 4 attacks with 4 cost, because you'd have to have 4 0 cost defense reactions. It will take your entire hand. Generally, damage is easier to block if it's wider rather than being taller, unless you're using effects like Dominate to stop the damage from coming through. So a lot of Azalea decks did actually aim to go wide, which is using things like Ravenous Rabble, using things like Enlightened Strike, and things like that to get go again on your weapon, and things like Razor Reflex as well, of course, which is an attack reaction that will give cheap attacks go again. And you're doing all of those things to just give you a bit of range, so that you can do multiple attacks in a turn, which then makes it harder to block the attacks. Because one of the things that makes Ranger quite an interesting class, and one of the things I can't really stop talking about enough, is that arrows are, more than any other attacks we see in the game, like often controlling cards. So you'll see Azalea's specialization. If it hits, they can't activate more than one action during the next turn. We have Endless Arrow. If it hits, it goes into the hand. You have Remorseless, which makes an opponent lose a life every time they play a card on the next turn. There's loads of these little effects, and basically almost every arrow does something pretty cool when it hits. So you just have to figure out the best way to make them hit. And as you can see, this deck has gone for a combination of Go Again with stuff like Ravenous Rabble, plus things like Take Aim, Nimblism, and those kind of things to buff the attack as well. So it's getting a mix of different options in there just to try and get the arrows to hit, because you can see every time one of these arrows hits, it has an interesting effect and an ability. Now, I just want to show you this page because I think it's quite relevant. Normally, if I put in any other hero here, we're going to see a load of entries. This is a really good tool, a deck tool, and you'll see there's loads of entries. And the reality is that Azalea just hasn't placed very well. And you know, if you like a challenge, maybe this is a good challenge for you to build an Azalea deck that can win. And you will see some consistent people playing Azalea and performing, I would say, somewhat okay with them, including in this guy in America. Though I do think Lexi is the stronger Ranger for now. There is another side to Ranger that hasn't really been fully developed yet, and it's not, the cards aren't even here, so I can't show you exactly. But it's the idea of traps. And the idea of traps is that they essentially punish your opponent for attacking you. See, because Azalea does have defense reactions, and this is the basic one from Arcane Rising. But in the Crucible of War set, they actually printed 3 trap cards, which basically are defense reactions that punish your opponent for attacking or cost them additional resources for attacking. So it's like, for example, they have to pay 1 resource or they take 1 damage. They have to pay 1 resource or discard a card from their hand, or, you know, it loses Go Again and things like that. So there's lots of different cool traps that you can do that kind of punish your opponent for attacking. The only problem really with the traps, and this is the big problem with them, is they have to be in the arsenal to trigger, which is a massive drawback because most of the good defense reactions don't require that sort of characterization. So it's another kind of thing to play around with Azalea that makes it kind of difficult to actually play her as a hero. Other than that, I mean, I'm going to say that there are really cool Azalea cards, and I mean, I'm just showing you some of them on the screen right now. You know, Remorseless stops people from playing defense reactions if it's in your arsenal face up, and if it hits, they lose 1 life every time they play an action card, as well as being a 1-for-5 attack. Searing Shot is a free 0-for-4 attack. If it hits, they lose 1 life, so it's a 0-for-5 if they don't block correctly. Sleep Dart turns off when a hero's card effects and activated abilities until the end of the next turn, which can be huge against heroes like Levia, Prism, Briar. Like, there's so many heroes this is really good against. And if they let this hit, which they probably won't, let's be honest, then this is really huge against them. But obviously, if you get 2 cards from them to block the 5 strength attack, or if you buff it with something like Seek and Destroy that we saw down here, then suddenly you're talking about having many, many, many more interesting effects when it hits. Also, with Hamstring Shot, the first attack on their next turn costs an additional 1. Now, this is a bit lackluster because, of course, Lexi deals in Frostbite tokens that basically all have this effect, but it is still quite a powerful effect to get off, and it can have a lot of strong impacts when it hits. What else can we look at? We can look at... so one interesting combo that I think people have tried before, and it is quite good, is that there are only certain numbers of very, very good arrows, and Azalea's deck relies on you really knowing what's on top of your deck so you can dominate it. A Memorial Ground lets you just pick an attack action card with cost 1 or less from your graveyard and put it on top of your deck, right? So you can imagine how I play Memorial Ground, I grab my Red in the Ledger or my Remorseless, I put it on top of my deck, and then I trigger Azalea, and that attack has Dominate. So when I play something like Seek and Destroy and give it +3, then suddenly that attack's coming in for 8 with Dominate, and I just had to play 2 cards to do it, right? It's not a big deal. Seek and Destroy is an interesting card. Worth getting, I would say, for Rangers. It gives +3, and if it hits a hero at the beginning of their end phase, they discard all cards in their hand, destroy all cards in their arsenal. This doesn't make your opponent do anything right away. It just says at the end of their next turn, they can't save any cards. So they can't arsenal or keep any cards in their hand. So they discard and they destroy their arsenal before they draw up. So they'll still draw 4 cards, but they can't save anything particularly special. And I have seen this genuinely screw some people over. Another card I think you almost definitely have to get if you're playing Azalea is 3 of a Kind. It costs you 1, you draw 3 cards, and at the end of the turn you can only play cards from your arsenal. Now it's important to understand that you don't want to to screw yourself with this card. If you've got something like Ravenous Rabble in hand, you want to play that first before you play Three of a Kind, and generally get any of the Go Again or the Nimblisms or stuff like that out of your hand before you play Three of a Kind, because once you play it, you can't play anything else. But ideally, you're going to play Three of a Kind, you're going to draw an arrow or two, and you're going to be able to shoot those arrows, right? You know, maybe you draw a red in the ledger, maybe you can shoot those arrows. And it's going to be good in that regard, right? There are risks with it. You can not draw any arrows. You can, of course, draw buff cards you can't play from your hand, and then just be forced to arsenal them next turn. But it is still a very strong card, and of course it helps also guarantee you do have an arrow, because sometimes one of the problems with Ranger versus other classes is that if you don't have an arrow, you can't attack, and ultimately, you know, whereas other classes to have a weapon that can attack. So if you play Three of a Kind, you can guarantee almost you're going to draw an arrow, which will let you load your weapon and then shoot your weapon, etc., etc., etc. So it is a very important card to complete the combo. Thanks again for watching this video. As I said, I hope if this helped you choose you want to play Azalea, or make you realize you didn't want to play Azalea right now, that's perfectly fine. Please do like and subscribe to the video if I helped you at all. And obviously, if you have questions that aren't answered by this video, or suggestions for what to include when I next record this video, because I will be updating them, please do let me know. I am hoping with Azalea, where Azalea is concerned, I will be able to come back to this video in, you know, a couple of months' time and record a new video about how Azalea is brilliant now and she's storming through the meta, or at least, you know, back up to being, you know, or even up to being like tier 1.5 or something like that. When she is, I'll do an update video, and I invite all of you Azalea lovers to come back. Aside from that, she's not terrible anymore. She did get a good buff in Tales of Aria with some of the cards like Seek and Destroy and things like that, so she does have a bit more reach than she used to. I still don't think she's necessarily the best hero or the best ranger. I would recommend going to look at Lexi for now for that. But if you really like Azalea, I think you'll be fine playing her. You're just going to have to put in a lot of practice and accept that sometimes your deck is going to screw you a little bit, and that's okay. Thanks all for listening. Have a great night.